This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. G-Money, we start with DeVante Parker, and I want to go question by question here, right? So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's look at this analytically. Let's look at this from every aspect. And we start with the deal itself. The Patriots trade a future third-round pick. They get DeVante Parker, a fifth-round pick in return. Your thoughts on the deal parameters and what the Patriots gave up here?
Yeah, I thought, look, basically what the Patriots gave up, a future third, so next year's third, is basically the equivalent of a fourth-round pick this year. And they get a fifth back this year. I mean, really, you're talking about, they really got him for free almost. I mean, there's not a huge difference. And I think when you talk about that compensation plus that DeVante Parker is under contract for 2 more years at a very manageable salary at like $6 million a year, to me, it was a no-brainer for the Patriots. I mean, I do kind of question, and this is one question I didn't put down, I don't think, why the Dolphins would do this. Why would they, basically allow the Patriots to get a starting caliber receiver? And we can debate on how good he is, but he's a starting caliber receiver in your division for not much compensation. And it's not like you're saving a ton of money if you're the Dolphins. So I think that you put all those aspects together. I mean, I like the deal overall for the Patriots, just the deal itself. It's kind of a no-brainer for me. I question it from a Dolphins perspective on exactly, what are they doing? What's the aim here? And we'll probably get into that as we talk about Parker, the player. But yeah, I think it's a good deal for the Patriots.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, I like the deal. I like it a lot just from the value standpoint. Again, you're not giving up much. People say, a third-round pick, like Greg mentioned. The NFL handles this in a different way. If you give up a third-round pick next year, it's really, giving up like a fourth-round pick this year, right? And when you look at a second-round pick, you kind of just jump the next round. So they didn't give up a ton. They have a compensatory pick. Now, whether or not they'll get that compensatory pick depends on what they do in free agency next year. But they didn't give up much, given that they're getting a fifth-round pick back. And people might say, a fifth-round pick. I actually think that fifth-round pick is going to help the Patriots. Number one, it doesn't give them this gigantic gap in the draft. And number two, we talk about their need for interior offensive linemen. You look back in the last several years, the Patriots and other teams have been able to find good starting guards in the NFL at the NFL level from the third, fifth, sixth round. So that could be a pick where they can earmark that interior offensive lineman. And as far as the contract, I mean, come on, he's going to make about $6 million the next 2 years. You saw what Stephon Diggs got this morning, $70 million guaranteed. And I'm not telling you he's Diggs, but you look at these huge contracts in the wide receiver market being like bananas to get a guy who I think is at least a solid number 2 for you for $6 million the next couple of years without giving up a ton. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Patriots. Greg, let's get into the scouting report. I know you wrote about Parker this week. I know that you looked at the film. What do you see from Parker, and what would you tell people is the scouting report? What's the book on DeVante Parker as he becomes a Patriot?
Okay, number one, and look, we've seen Parker twice a year since 2015 with the Dolphins. So some people are familiar with him, but sometimes you get confused. Like, is it Jarvis Landry or is it DeVante Parker? And it's like hard to differentiate some of these guys down in Miami. And so, I watched all of his 2021 film. And the number one thing I think people need to understand is this is not a game breaker type of guy. If he was the 14th overall pick in 2015, normally when you get a pick that high, you're like, all right, this is a guy who's a playmaker. He's not that. I mean, he basically what people should think of is sort of a skinnier, not as physically strong, but a much better receiver than N'Keal Harry. They're very similar in that they are boundary guys. They, in theory, of course, when we're talking about N'Keal Harry, but, body control guys, catch a lot of back shoulders, really good on contested catches, pretty good with the ball in his hand. I like Parker. He seems to take another level once, and people can remember some of those slants that Tua's hit the past couple of years on the Patriots, sort of late in the game to clinch games where the Patriots had all this cushion. That was DeVante Parker a couple times. And he's the type of guy who can he runs a lot of those slants like that where, he's a bigger body. He's 6'3". He's about 200 pounds. He ran 4.45 coming out. He's probably not that now. He's probably more like 4.5, maybe 4.55. But he catches the ball, and I think he has very good awareness once he gets the ball in his hands. He has the ability to break a tackle because he's a bigger guy, not as thick as N'Keal Harry, but still a bigger guy. You see guys bounce off his legs at times, and he can get another 20 yards that way. If you think that he is just going to be on the boundary and, dust some cornerback off the wide receiver and catch a 70-yard touchdown pass, that's not really his game. And, when we get into sort of the fit with the Patriots, I think that context is important about what they might do. What do they do about Nelson Agholor? I think that, basically he's a Harry replacement. Hasn't worked out with Harry. They like that type of guy. He's the type of guy, Nick, that when he's covered, he's still open. In that it's a good type of guy for Mac Jones, in that, Mac Jones can say, all right, well, this covered, I like this matchup. I think DeVante Parker in a 50-50 ball is going to win this battle, and he can go to him in a big spot. So I think there is definite value there. He might not, keep defensive coordinators awake at night, but he certainly has value. And at $6 million a year, I think you see – Robbie Anderson was a lot higher price. I think Robbie Anderson's a better player, more big play potential. But in terms of bang for your buck, you can get a lot with DeVante Parker.
He gives Mac Jones an out, somebody that Mac can believe in and trust. If, like you said, Greg, if the guy's covered, Mac can still throw it to him. He's very good at contested catches, as you've mentioned. If you look at it statistically, since like 2019, he's right at the top of the heap. And that's even more, I think, to me, that's even more impressive, the fact that he is near the top of the mountain, if not on the top of the mountain when it comes to contested catches in the last few years, given that he hasn't played a ton. Like, he hasn't played 16 games a year. He hasn't played 17 games last year, which we'll get into, because I think the biggest question about him is his health. But even when he hasn't been healthy, that should tell you how often Miami threw the football and believed in him and trusted in his ability to come down at the high point of the catch and win that battle. So I think he's an out for Mac. And when you look at what the Patriots have tried to do, this makes a ton of sense, doesn't it? I mean, what they've tried to go out and get, N'Keal Harry, it didn't work out. They were interested in Allen Robinson. They could not, they didn't want to pay him the money, or he wanted to go LA, whatever happened there. Mm-hmm. They've been looking for the last few years for this bigger boundary receiver who might not be, the most speedy guy in the world, but when you throw it up, he can go and get it. And when you're in the red zone, he's that kind of bigger bodied target. And they got Parker. And I think for the value, it makes just so much sense. When you look at this offense,
Nick, one more thing I forgot on Parker that I wanted to bring up. And you brought up his injuries. There's obviously some red flags. Some of the things I didn't like, if I'm the Patriots wide receivers coach, whether that's Troy Brown or Joe Judge or whoever it is, the number one thing I'm working on Parker on is his route running at the top of his route. Meaning, if he's running a 20-yard in cut, he's running straight down the field for 20 yards, then all of a sudden he's breaking across. And if people might remember this play, and I broke down this play on BSJ, he had an in cut against J.C. Jackson last year where J.C. Jackson eventually came in and broke up the play. Now, look, Tua's his quarterback. I mean, actually, I thought that throw was pretty good. But what happens on that route is DeVante Parker gets to the top of the route, and instead of coming down straight down the 39-yard line across the field, which would gain you a couple extra yards of space, Parker sort of faded his route almost to like the 35-yard line. And that allowed J.C. Jackson the opportunity the time and also the avenue to undercut the route and get a piece of the ball and break up that play. If DeVante Parker, because he's not the fastest guy in the world, he's more of a long strider type of guy. He's not going to run away from anybody. He's not going to outquick anybody. But if he's more precise with his route running, then all of a sudden you gain a couple extra yards and now you're a lot more productive. And to me, I see that sort of upside with Parker, that, he looks like a smart receiver on film. He's talented. He does catch 50-50 balls very well, which is very important to the Patriots. But if he could just be a little bit more precise in his route running, I think he can be that much better. And if I'm Troy Brown, and hopefully he's the Patriots wide receivers coach, then that's job one with DeVante Parker. And I think he can go to another level if he can master that.
Yeah. Can they coach him up? And quarterback is also a question, which we'll get into the year that Parker had in 2019 with Ryan Fitzpatrick. When I look at this overall, Greg, and I want to look at the parts now that the Patriots have at receiver, because people might say, oh, who does he replace? What does he do? As we've mentioned, I think it's obvious his fit is that at that X receiver position. That's who he's going to be. What I really like about this trade and this idea and this philosophy, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about last week with the defensive secondary and the Patriots being able to move different guys in different spots and being able to game plan for certain teams and mix and match and have that versatility. The Parker move now, it opens up these other guys. Now you can slide Agholor into the slot and he can run different routes and he could be that explosive guy out of the slot position and he can get downfield. You have the Kendrick Bourne kind of jack of all trades where you can move him around. Now you've got that solid boundary, bigger receiver that you've been looking for. You have Jonnu Smith, who I think we both believe is going to be used in different ways this season. And I think he will have more impact. Is he going to be great? Jury's still out, but I think he'll have more impact than last year. And you've got Hunter Henry along with the back. So, you might not have that number one stud like Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, and everybody's given up tons of picks and tons of money to these guys. But when you look at the overall core and the overall offense, there's not a name that gets you all crazy and, doing jumping jacks. But football-wise, I think a lot of this makes sense. And I think the Patriots, they're going to look at Agholor and say, he's going to be better now because we're going to utilize him better because we've got DeVante Parker. Bourne with another year in the offense, we're going to be able to use his kind of gadgetry a little bit and utilize him more. Jonnu Smith, let's get rid of the traditional fullback and let's use him in different ways. And I'm kind of excited and interested in what this coaching staff does. And we've had our questions about the offensive side of the ball and the coaching staff, and there should be questions. But I am excited and interested what this offense looks like and what shape it's going to take as these guys all come together and try to figure it out.
Yeah, sort of the big thing for me watching Parker on film is, and look, this can change, and I think a lot of it could change on the draft, but I think Agholor still has a place here. Now, he's got a very high cap number this year, so if the Patriots all of a sudden, say they take Mechie from Alabama or something in the second round or, trade down and get a wide receiver and they get to camp and they're like, this guy's good, then Agholor becomes expendable because of the cost. Right. But, as of right now, as of today, I think Agholor has a place on this team. And I think, you and I have talked about it before that I think that, and I don't blame the Patriots for taking this approach. I like it. And we talked about it when they signed all those free agents last year. I'm a little bit worried how much it's going to mesh in year one. It's normally better in year two. And I think that, a guy like Agholor stands a chance to be, much better. I do think the arrival of DeVante Parker, helps Agholor get some better matchups and things like that. But to me, Agholor is still the outside speed element on this team as of right now. That might change with the draft. And I think, like you said, Kendrick Bourne is the more gadgety, quick sort of guy. But to me, I think as of right now, I think Parker and Agholor are almost if you go with two wide receivers, they're almost your quote unquote starting receivers because they're two different receivers. Agholor is more of a deep guy. DeVante Parker is more of a power forward type of guy. And then all of a sudden you get Bourne and Myers into the mix. And, so I agree with you. I like their mix. I still think Agholor has a place here. I think that they'll be able to move him around a little bit more to sort of take advantage of matchups and that sort of thing. But I think that I like the group that they have. They're all different, and it'll be interesting to see if they do anything in the draft to sort of accentuate that.
Yeah, and of course, I didn't forget about Jakobi Meyers. He's out there as well. He has proven himself as kind of a big-bodied slot receiver somewhat. And I think when you have those four guys, if they can stay healthy, it is an interesting mix. You just brought up the draft. Greg, if you're Bill Belichick and you're looking at this roster right now and you're thinking, what are we going to do come draft night and draft weekend? Are you done at the receiver position?
I thought so, Nick, until I was reading at Boston Sports Journal. Our draft guy, Kevin Field, did his, we just posted a little while ago, his sort of wide receiver scouting report. And, it's interesting. It's chock full of, he goes through potential first rounders and then also Patriots fit by round. And what really stood out to me, and I guess I really didn't take note of it until I saw it on paper, is that the Patriots, even with DeVante Parker, and look, we all know this could change over time, but right now they don't have one receiver on the roster that's signed through the 2020, signed beyond 2023.
Yep.
I mean, and when you're talking about, you have Mac Jones, he's going into his second year, you'd love to have some sort of guy. Preferably for me, it's a speedy, quick slot receiver that you say, all right, Mac, here's your guy for the next 5 to 10 years. And so to me, just looking at the depth chart, to me, it screams out that they need some sort of potential starter at receiver. I don't care what position it is, out of this draft. I mean, I don't think it's not, certainly not mandatory now. And maybe the Patriots, they've had some success with undrafted free agents, and we know how deep the receiver class is. So you could get a good developmental guy late in the draft or undrafted free agency. But to me, I still think, you know my dream. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows my dream. A speedy slot receiver that Matt can go to and can get open. Julian Edelman, Wes Welker type of guy. To me, I think wide receiver is still on the list.
I agree with you. I think when you look contractually, you hit the nail on the head. Agholor, Myers, they're likely gone after this year. Myers, he's proven himself. He's going to probably price him out of the Patriots. Maybe not, but
he's going to take some cut rate, team friendly deal. He is. That's coming in like a week. I'm just telling you.
He could. But, when you look at it right now, and all we can go off of is the information that we have at our fingertips. I mean, again, you hit the nail on the head. Agholor, Myers, they're done after this year. Parker has 2 years left. You look at Bourne is gone pretty soon. So I do think you have to get younger at that position. And I do think you have to draft somebody in this year's draft. Is that the second round, third round, fifth round? I don't know. I think somebody like John Mechie makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what the Patriots have done here, they've bought themselves some time. And when we talk about the wide receiver development and the lack thereof, some of it is they haven't drafted a lot of guys in premier positions, of the draft and the slots, for guys like wide receivers. When you look at first round pick, of course, Harry was a first round pick, didn't work out, but a lot of their picks have been mid-round, late round picks, undrafted free agents at that position. They haven't invested nearly as much as other teams draft capital wise in the wide receiver position. And what they're doing, I think, is now you've got 2 bites at the apple, right? Like, so you've got yourself set up for this year. If you draft somebody like Mechie, who's coming off of, I believe, an ACL.
Yeah, or Jameson Williams.
If you draft somebody who's coming off of an injury, and one of the biggest criticisms of this year's wide receiver draft class is that they've been hurt. There's a lot of guys that have been dinged up, some serious injuries. You mentioned, Jameson, and of course, Mechie with the ACLs. Pickens is another guy who's been banged up. There's a lot of good receiving talent. I don't know if they're all going to be number ones, but they're banged up. So what this does is it allows the Patriots, let's say they like Mechie, but they say to themselves, we don't want to rush him back. We don't want to, lack any kind of development. we can draft somebody like Mechie. We deal N'Keal Harry for a 5th round pick or a 6th round, whatever they do. We bring Mechie in, and now we can cultivate him. We can grow him within the system. And by next year, now he's popping. And then you also have next year's draft that you can also address the wide receiver position if you feel the need to. So I think it keeps their options open. And Greg, you've done a really good job of addressing this in the past about Belichick and how, the first 15, 16 years of his tenure in New England, he was always ahead. He always had contingencies. He always knew what was happening in the future and to try to be ahead of the curve. And I think he's doing that with receiver, especially if they draft a receiver or two over the next year or two. He's getting ahead of this, and he's giving himself and his staff some time to truly develop the young receiver that they bring in, and they don't just throw him into the fire. So I think they're absolutely open to looking at drafting a receiver. Let's look at 2019, Greg. DeVante Parker, his best season as an NFL receiver. He had Ryan Fitzpatrick that year. He hasn't been necessarily great with Tua. What do you make of all of that? How much is on Parker? How much is on the quarterback situation? And one more thing I'll throw in there that people might not be keenly aware of is not only you look at the quarterback, but you look at the offensive coordinator position. And I've made this joke before. I'll make it again. When Brian Flores was head coach in Miami, he changed OCs like he changed his underwear. He went through Chad O'Shea. Then he went to Chan Gailey. Then he went to the 2 offensive coordinator system. It was always all over the place. So when you look at Parker and you assess him, how much of that other stuff do you think affected him and maybe impacted his production?
Well, I'll say this. I think that, when I evaluate receivers, I'm not looking at, production and things like that. I'm looking at, can he get open? Can he catch contested passes? How does he do after the catch? What's his route running like? And it's not really affected by who the quarterback is. So I think, his assessment, if he was coming off 2019, I wouldn't say anything different about DeVante Parker. I mean, I do think he's a little slower. I mean, he's 29 with a lot of soft tissue injuries. And, that was one of the concerns. I have a pretty good source with the Dolphins, and I asked him about Parker, and he had a lot of praise for Parker, but, the soft tissue injury stuff is real with him. And I don't think he's quite as explosive as he used to be. The biggest thing I'll say about 2019 is, Ryan Fitzpatrick is a guy who he just slings it. He doesn't care whether you're open. He's confident that he can throw you open, that you'll make a play, whereas Tua will be a lot more half-field reads, a lot more conservative. I don't want to make a mistake, even though he does make mistakes. And I just think, and look, I would say Mac Jones is somewhere in between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua in terms of, his confidence, which I think is going to grow in terms of, fitting balls into spots and really pushing the envelope. Early in the season, he was a lot more conservative as a rookie. You figured that would be the case. He got a little bit more aggressive and more comfortable as the season went along, as Josh McDaniels brought him along. I think that, I wouldn't look at 2019 and say, DeVante Parker's a 1,200-yard receiver, 9 touchdowns every year. I would just say that if the more aggressive Mac is, and I think he will grow in that area, then I think Parker will be able to deliver for Mac Jones and be productive.
Let's jump to the draft where, let me see. I think 3 weeks away from tomorrow, we've got the NFL draft. Greg, when you look at the Patriots roster, which 3 positions must the Patriots draft and get a potential starter? When you look at the 3 positions that you want to stick a pin in, so to speak, if you're the Patriots, and you say, we've got to get a starter down the road at that position, what positions are we talking?
Number 1 for me, and I know it's not sexy, and people will make fun of me because they love to when it comes to this, but to me, it's a run stuffer inside, like a bona fide, got to put 2 guys on him, got to take up blockers, he's not going to get moved, that sort of guy. Because even if you think, give Devon Godchow the year 2 or year 1 pass that we're giving Nelson Agholor and Jonnu Smith. Even if you do that, he's in a contract year. And there's nothing beyond that. I mean, the only other real interior guys that they have are Ekawale and Bill Murray. That's, and Bill Murray's a nice try-hard guy, but he's undersized, and Ekawale's okay, but that's literally all they have at nose tackle. I mean, Lawrence Guy is, I look at him as more of an end, and that's where he's played here. Or, if you go to a 4-3, I don't want to get into that because it really doesn't matter anymore. You need to stop the run at least on first down in the league now. And I just don't think the Patriots have the personnel. I'm not high on Godchow. He could be better in year 2. I'm not discounting that. I'm just going off of what I saw in year 1. He should have had an easier time transitioning than anybody because he was in Miami with Brian Flores playing the exact same spot. He played it well. He comes here. It shouldn't have been any transition for him, and he underwhelmed largely last year. To me, if they have a chance to get a guy like Jordan Davis from Georgia at number 21, and he's there, I'm running up to the podium and I'm taking him because you put his 6'6", 340-pound, bench press 8,000 pounds guy right in the middle of that defense. The Patriots are a hell of a lot better the next day. So to me, number 1 is a run stuffer nose tackle.
Me as cornerback. I still think they need a legit man cornerback who can play press coverage, even if they're going to a little bit more zone. I'm not the biggest fan of Jalen Mills, as you know. You might be able to hide him at the number 2 position with a really good number 1. Malcolm Butler's 32 years old. Terrence Mitchell is pretty much, your solid NFL veteran. They need to get younger at cornerback, and they need to get somebody who can play man coverage. You don't necessarily need a lockdown top 5 corner, but I really think they have to show some urgency getting young at that position because the guys right now on the roster, a lot of questions for me. And so I'd like to see them invest in a nice, young, legit man cover corner. But hey, look, I hear you. I hear you about Jordan Davis. And I don't necessarily disagree with your Jordan Davis take. I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, Elam versus Davis at 21, I would go with the higher ceiling, more potential guy, and I would pick Davis. And I would hope that one of the corners that would fall to me in the second round would be my man corner of the future. Because Davis, look, if you could just imagine Christian Barmore with Jordan Davis and how much of a disaster that would be for opposing offensive lines, it makes me straight up giddy.
They'd wreck people. Teams would not be able to handle it inside.
Yep. I mean, and we always talk about it, but it's so true. If you can get that pressure up the middle, and that is what destroys a quarterback. So I think if you could get Davis at 21, I would have absolutely no problem with that pick. Your second position you're looking at, Greg.
Offensive tackle. Isaiah Wynn's in his 5th-year option year. Trent Brown is here for, who knows how long. If he doesn't play more than, a half a season, he could be gone after this year. They didn't, give him that much money. They didn't guarantee him that much money. They don't. But the big thing is I think they need to try to get a guy who's a left tackle for the future. And either, for the first year as a rookie, starts at guard, or you move Wynn inside the guard and play this kid. I'm getting an offensive tackle with starter upside relatively early in the draft because to me it's a huge need. I think both tackle spots beyond this year are big question marks.
We once again agree, Mr. Bedard, because I think when you look at offensive tackle, you said everything I could say. Brown and Wynn, to me, major question marks for the long term. And if you could get a staple, if you could get a guy who's there for the next 8 to 10 years and you could rely on, then you could figure it out with Wynn. And if Brown has a good season, great. You could keep Brown and everything's fine. But right now it's a little too unknown, a little too unpredictable. And I'm not super confident in Brown being able to stay healthy. And I'm not super confident after Wynn's season a year ago. So I think getting that young tackle would make a ton of sense. Your third position.
Yeah, you made me reconsider. Cornerback is definitely on the list, and it should definitely be considered. So I'm going to split cornerback and also wide receiver here. There's sort of a tie for me because we talked about the future There's no one signed beyond 2023 at receiver. You'd love to get a talented young guy that you can pair with Mac Jones and their, Batman and Robin for the next 10 years at receiver. You would love to get that guy in this draft, but if it doesn't work out, okay. But, I'm fine with a cornerback because, like you said, cornerback is in the same sort of position. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know whether you have a matchup guy in terms of man coverage in that unit. You'd like that because you're going to have to win on third and 12, big game, playoff game, or to get into the playoffs. You're going to have to man up and bring pressure at certain times. Who's going to do that? Who's going to provide a stop for you? It's tough to see anybody right now, and you need to get somebody in the pipeline that can do that for you.
Yeah, wide receiver is my third, so we're all pretty much on the same page. Let's jump to the BostonSportsJournal.com member question of the day. Check them out over at BSJ. $39.99 on the annual plan, of course. Not only do you get top-notch analysis of all the Boston pro sports, and look, it's a great time, right? The Bruins marching towards the playoffs. Celtics are in the playoffs. Red Sox season starting. There's a lot happening right now. The offseason with football. We got the draft coming up. We still have a lot of free agents out there. Akeem Hicks, Trey Flowers, Honey Badger. People are still out there. Things can happen. Aside from all of that good information that you can get, you also get with a membership a ton of video analysis that Bedard does on the coaches film. And Bedard wrote about DeVante Parker this week and broke down some film.
Mac Davis next.
Ooh, there you go. How about that? And you got direct access to him in weekly chats as well. Jackie Treehorn has a question. Greg, is there a reason to think Joe Judge will be coaching wide receivers as opposed to Troy Brown?
So this was a question that came from my DeVante Parker breakdown, and I talked about, the number one job for the wide receiver coach, and I mentioned Joe Judge, and I wanted to answer this question just because I wasn't really thinking. I mean, I was more thinking about Parker. In my mind, I'm like, Joe Judge was a wide receivers coach last time he was here. But, from what we know, the pieces that we know, it's Joe Judge is probably going to coach quarterbacks or be involved with the quarterbacks. He might be, from what I hear, Nick, from the owners' meetings, and we didn't talk about this last week, from what I heard, the scuttlebutt is Joe Judge is going to be the pass game coordinator, and Matt Patricia is going to be the run game coordinator. Offensive line, run game coordinator. Joe Judge is going to be either quarterbacks or wide receivers / pass game coordinator. So I just wanted to make that point to everybody and get that out there.
Very interesting. Joe Judge, pass game coordinator. Patricia, run game coordinator. I don't know how I feel about that.
If somebody told you that 10 years ago, or they say 6 or 7 years ago, they're going to be like, in 2023, you're going to have a second year, first round quarterback. And guess what? Matt Patricia is going to be the run game coordinator, and Joe Judge is going to be the pass game coordinator. You'd be like, what?
Depending on what happens over the next week, I think next week, let's just kind of keep this in mind. I think drilling down on the offensive staff and Mac Jones, and I know Dan Orlovsky, we don't have enough time to get to it today, but Dan Orlovsky talked about, how it's his biggest worry in the NFL, his biggest concern this year is who is surrounding Mac Jones. And I'll just say this. There have been quarterbacks in the past that have had to go through a lot of different change and have still been able to remain successful and take a step forward. Now, is Mac going to be one of those guys? I don't know. That's more the anomaly. You would like to have a coaching staff and consistency and play calling and all of that stuff for a young quarterback. I 100% agree with Dan about that. But, Justin Herbert had a lot of change in his first couple of years, and he seemed to do okay. So I think, if Mac is as smart as we give him credit for, and they improve around him and utilize their talent better, then I think he'll be fine.
Oh, Ben, Nick, real quick.
Sure.
That reminds me. One thing I wanted to clean up a little bit from last week, I think it was last week, and we talked about, and I didn't go back and listen to it, but remember when I brought up what's the craziest rumor I heard at the league meetings? And
Bill O'Brien.
I thought that I couched it as, this is a crazy rumor. I don't think I really believe it. Like, I think we couched it that way, but let's just say Bill O'Brien will not be succeeding Nick Saban at Alabama. And I think we brought this up that Nick Saban's probably going to coach till he's like 90. The guy's 70 years old, but he's got the body of a 50-year-old. Like, that's not on the table. Again, that's, it was a crazy rumor. I just want to make that clear before Zoe and Beetle run wild with it even more. But I just wanted to make that clear that it was a very crazy rumor.
See what you started? He's Greg Bedard, G-Money, the man. I am Nick Cattles, Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. Everybody have a good weekend. We mean it. Be good. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to you next week.